Hello, night seekers, and welcome to Midnight Scary Storyteller, a place where forgotten tales and gentle voices guide you softly into sleep, wrapped in mystery and shadow. Before tonight's story begins, don't forget to subscribe and tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Leave a comment below. I always love seeing where these midnight stories find their way. Now dim the lights, get comfortable, close your eyes, and let's drift together into the unknown. When I was younger, I lived in a house that other kids insisted was haunted. I did not know whether I believed them at first. It was one of those things people say when they want to make an ordinary house sound more interesting. The kids who had known the family living there before us would talk about strange noises, weird feelings, and things that happened in certain rooms. They would say the people who lived there before us thought the house had something in it. At the time, I mostly treated it like a story. I was a kid, and kids love stories like that. You hear that a house might be haunted, and suddenly every creak in the hallway feels important. A pipe knocking in the wall becomes footsteps. A door settling in its frame becomes someone trying to get in. A shadow from a car passing outside becomes a person standing in the corner. Still, I did not think much about it during the day. During the day, it was just our house. It was the place where I slept, played games, watched TV, had friends over, annoyed my cousins, and did all the normal things kids do. My room was my favorite place in the house. It had my bed, my stuff, and enough floor space for people to hang out when friends stayed the night. One of the things hanging on my wall was an old Space Jam clock. I loved that clock. It was one of those things that felt extremely cool when you were a kid. It had the Space Jam design on it, and to me it was more than just something that told the time. It made my room feel like mine. It was part of the wall, part of the room, and part of all the nights I spent in there playing, talking, or trying to fall asleep. The clock hung across the room from my bed. If I was lying down, it was maybe 10 feet away from me, on the far wall. My bed was against one side of the room, and there was enough space on the floor beside it for someone to sleep over. That was where my friend slept one night when he came to stay at my house. He had a blanket and a pillow on the floor next to my bed. We were doing what kids do at sleepovers. We were trying to stay awake longer than we were supposed to. We talked about random things, laughed at stupid stuff, probably played games or watched something before bed, then kept talking after the lights were off. Eventually, like most sleepovers, the conversation somehow turned into ghosts. We started talking about haunted houses, creepy stories, weird sounds, and whether either of us had ever seen anything strange. Then, we started talking about my house. I told him what the other kids had said. I told him that people who knew the previous family claimed the house was haunted. I do not remember every story they had told, but I remember the general idea. Apparently, strange things had happened there before we moved in. Things that made people uncomfortable. Things that made the house seem like it had a reputation. My friend was interested, but I do not know whether he believed any of it. We were kids, so it was probably half scary and half funny. We would say things like, "What if someone is standing outside the room right now?" Then we would laugh, but still listen harder to the hallway afterward. The room was dark. The only light probably came from outside, maybe a little bit through the curtains, enough to make out the shape of furniture, but not much else. I remember lying in bed and trying to get comfortable while my friend was on the floor beside me. We kept talking for a while. Eventually, I started getting sleepy. The conversation slowed down. We were both tired. My friend's voice got quieter. Mine probably did too. I remember being right at that point where you are still aware of the room around you, but sleep is beginning to pull you under. Then I heard a loud bang. It was sudden enough that it snapped me awake. At first, I did not know what it was. The sound was hard and sharp, like something solid had struck the floor or a wall. It was not a small creak. It was not the house settling. It sounded like an object had been thrown. Before I could sit up properly, my friend said my name. He sounded scared and angry at the same time. He asked me if I had thrown the Space Jam clock at him. For a second, I did not understand what he meant. I was half asleep. I had just heard the banging sound, and my mind was still trying to figure out where it came from. Then I remembered the clock. It had been hanging across the room. I told him no. I said I had been sleeping. He did not believe me. He thought I had grabbed the clock and thrown it at him as some kind of joke. From his point of view, I guess it made sense. We had been talking about ghosts. The room was dark. Then suddenly the clock came crashing down near him. It would have been easy to assume I was trying to scare him. But I had not gotten out of bed. I had not touched the clock. I had been lying there, almost asleep, when it happened. The clock had somehow come off the wall and landed close enough to him that he thought I had thrown it. I remember trying to explain that I was not messing with him. I probably told him I had been asleep. I probably said there was no way I could have reached it without him noticing. The clock was on the other side of the room. Even if I had wanted to pull some joke, I would have had to get out of bed, cross the room in the dark, take it down, then throw it. My friend was right beside my bed. He would have heard me move. But he did not believe me. He stayed convinced that I had done it. Maybe he thought I had waited until he was drifting off. Maybe he thought I had somehow quietly slipped out of bed. Maybe he thought the haunted house story was just something I was using to make the prank seem better. Every time I brought it up after that, he would tell me I was full of it. He said I was messing with him. He said I had thrown the clock. And honestly, I could never prove otherwise. There was no video. There was no way to show him that I had not moved. All I knew was that I had heard the bang at the same time he did, and I had no memory of touching the clock at all. I do not remember whether we went back to sleep easily after that. Knowing us, we probably talked about it for a while. Maybe we got more scared because we had already been discussing ghosts. Maybe we checked the wall where the clock had been hanging. Maybe we looked at the hook, the nail, or whatever had been holding it up. There could have been a simple explanation. Maybe the hook had been loose. Maybe the clock had been hanging badly for a long time. Maybe the nail had slowly pulled free from the wall. Maybe the clock fell at the exact wrong time, and because it landed close to my friend, he assumed I had thrown it. That is possible. It is probably the explanation most people would give. But it still felt strange that it happened right after we started talking about the house being haunted. It felt strange that the clock came down with enough force to make my friend think it had been thrown at him. And it felt strange that even though he was right beside me, he never heard me get out of bed. That was the first thing that made me wonder whether the stories about the house might have been more than stories. The second thing happened another time, with my cousin. It was not a sleepover exactly, but we were hanging out in my room. I do not remember what we had been doing before it happened. We may have been watching TV, playing games, talking, or just being bored. But I remember the positions we were in clearly. My cousin was sitting or lying in my bed. I was on the floor. He had an orange soda can in his hand. I do not know why I did it, but at some point I slapped the can straight up out of his hand. Not across the room, not toward the wall. Straight up. It was probably meant to be a stupid little move, the kind of thing cousins do to annoy each other. I may have thought the can would fly up a little, bounce off something and fall down. Maybe I expected soda to spill everywhere and for us both to panic because of the carpet. But the second I hit it, something went wrong. Or at least, wrong in a way I still cannot explain. The can left his hand. Then, it did not come down. At first, I thought I had simply lost sight of it. The room was not huge, but it was big enough that a can could disappear into the darkness above or behind furniture for a moment. I thought maybe it had landed on the bed, bounced behind something, or rolled under a chair. But then we waited. There was silence. Not the sound of a can hitting the ground. Not the sound of soda spilling. Not the sound of aluminum bouncing off furniture. Nothing. A few seconds passed. That does not sound like a long time when you read it, but it felt incredibly long in the moment. I had just smacked a soda can out of my cousin's hand. A normal can should have come down immediately. Even if I slapped it hard, gravity should have done its job. It should have hit the floor in less than a second. Instead, there was nothing. My cousin looked around. I looked around. I remember saying something like, "Where'd it go?" It sounds funny now, but I was genuinely confused. The can had been there 1 second. Then it was gone. We both stared around the room, waiting to hear it land. Then, after what felt like way too long, it finally crashed down. The sound was loud. The can hit the floor somewhere nearby, and both of us reacted immediately. We both said something like, "What the frick?" at the same time. We were not even trying to sound dramatic. We were just shocked. The room had been silent for long enough that both of us had started wondering whether the can had somehow vanished. Then it suddenly dropped out of nowhere. I turned the light on as fast as I could. Part of me expected to find orange soda everywhere. I expected a mess on the carpet. I expected the can to be dented, rolling around, spraying soda, or lying on its side with sticky orange liquid spreading underneath it. But the can had landed upright. Perfectly upright. It was sitting there like someone had carefully placed it down, and somehow it had not spilled. That was the part that made the whole thing feel even stranger. I had slapped it straight up. It had disappeared for several seconds. Then it came down and landed upright without staining my carpet. It felt impossible. We both stared at it. I do not remember whether we touched it right away. I think we probably did. We may have checked whether it was still full. We may have looked at the ceiling, trying to figure out if it had hit something and gotten stuck somehow. But there was nothing. No shelf above us. No place it could have rested. No obvious explanation for why it took so long to fall. Maybe the room was darker than I remember, and the can landed somewhere soft before dropping again. Maybe it bounced off a bed frame or piece of furniture in a way neither of us noticed. Maybe it got caught in a blanket, curtain, or some part of the room before slipping loose. But I do not remember anything like that. I remember silence. I remember wondering where it had gone. Then I remember it dropping straight down and landing upright. After that, the house felt different to me, not terrifying all the time. I did not spend every night hiding under my blankets or refusing to go into my room. In fact, I loved that house. I have a lot of good memories there. Friends came over. Family came over. I had fun in that room. I spent years there growing up. But there were moments when I would remember the clock. There were moments when I would remember the orange soda can. And then I would think about what the kids had said when we first moved in. That the house was haunted. The strange thing about haunted house stories is that they always sound silly until something happens directly in front of you. Before the Space Jam clock fell, I probably would have laughed if someone told me an object flew across their room. Before the soda can stayed in the air longer than it should have, I probably would have assumed they were exaggerating. But when you are there, it feels different. You remember the sound. You remember who was beside you. You remember the silence after something should have happened, but did not. and you remember how both people in the room reacted at the same time. I think that is why those two incidents stayed with me. They were not things I experienced alone. My friend was there for the clock. My cousin was there for the soda can. Neither of them had heard my version before it happened. Neither of them was looking for something spooky. Both of them reacted naturally before there was time to make a story out of it. My friend thought I had thrown the clock because it genuinely looked like someone had thrown it. My cousin and I both stared at the empty space after the soda can vanished because neither of us understood where it had gone. The house had other little things too. Nothing I could prove. There were sounds that seemed louder at night. There were times when a room felt colder than the rest of the house. There were moments when you thought you heard somebody moving in another part of the house, only to find nobody there. But houses make noises. Old walls creak, pipes knock, doors shift, furniture settles. And when you grow up hearing that your house might be haunted, you can start treating every normal thing like evidence. I know that. I know memory can make things feel stranger over time. Maybe the clock really did fall off a bad hook. Maybe my friend only thought it had been thrown because he had been lying on the floor near where it landed. Maybe the soda can caught on something for a second, and our kid brains turned 2 seconds into 10. Maybe it bounced in a way that made it seem impossible. Maybe there was always a normal reason. But the memories still feel real. I can still picture my friend lying on the floor next to my bed, calling my name after the bang. I can still picture the Space Jam clock across the room. I can still remember how annoyed he got when I insisted I had not thrown it. And I can still picture the orange soda can standing upright on the carpet after it finally came down. The fact that it did not spill almost felt like a joke, like whatever had happened decided to be polite enough not to ruin the carpet. That house never felt fully scary to me. That is why I miss it. It was strange. Sure, it had moments that made no sense. It had nights where the dark felt a little too quiet and rooms felt a little too still. But it was also home. I grew up there. I had sleepovers there. I laughed there. I had stupid fights with cousins there. I watched TV, stayed up too late, and made memories that had nothing to do with ghosts. Maybe that is why the weird things do not make me hate the place. They are just part of the story now. A Space Jam clock that fell like it had been thrown. An orange soda can that disappeared into thin air for a few seconds, and a house that may or may not have had something in it, but somehow always felt like it belonged to us anyway. My mom had told us more than once that she did not like being alone in the bathroom. It was not something she talked about constantly, and she never turned it into a dramatic ghost story. Usually, she would mention it in passing, almost like she was trying to make sense of something she did not fully understand herself. She would say that sometimes, when she was showering, she felt like someone else was in there with her. Not outside the door, not somewhere else in the house. Inside the bathroom, right beside her. At first, I did not take it very seriously. I was used to adults saying strange things sometimes, especially about old houses, creaking pipes, or odd feelings late at night. I assumed she was joking, or maybe she was just talking about that normal uneasy feeling people get when they're alone in a quiet room. But she did not sound like she was joking. She said she could feel a presence. She would be showering with the curtain closed, water running, unable to hear much beyond the sound of the pipes and the spray hitting the tub. Then, without warning, she would get the feeling that someone was standing close to her. Not just the usual fear of being alone behind a shower curtain. She described it as something more specific than that. She said it felt like someone was watching her. Sometimes she would turn around quickly, expecting to see a person on the other side of the curtain. There would never be anyone there. The bathroom would be empty. The door would be closed. The mirror would show only the ordinary room behind her. But the feeling would stay. She would get out of the shower faster than she planned to. She would dry off quickly, get dressed, and leave the bathroom with a strange certainty that she had not been alone in it. There was one experience she told us about that scared me more than the others. She said that at one point, while she was in the bathroom, she felt hands around her neck. Not a pressure from a towel. Not a sudden muscle spasm. Not the feeling of a necklace or clothing touching her skin. Hands. She said it felt as though someone had placed both hands around her throat and started to squeeze. She could not see anyone. She did not see a face in the mirror. She did not see a shadow move behind her. But she felt it clearly enough that she panicked. She grabbed at her own neck, trying to pull away from something that was not there. She said the pressure only lasted a few seconds, but it was long enough to leave her shaken. Then it stopped. Just like that, she was alone in the bathroom again. No one else in the family had seen anything unusual at that point. We had all heard her talk about the feeling of someone being there, but nobody had proof of anything. It was easy to blame it on stress, exhaustion, imagination, or the way a bathroom can feel strange when the shower is running and you cannot hear what is happening in the rest of the house. Still, after she told us about the hands around her neck, the bathroom never felt completely normal to me again. It was an ordinary bathroom. There was nothing obviously creepy about it. It had a mirror over the sink, a shower, a toilet, cabinets, towels, and the usual clutter that builds up in a family home. During the day, sunlight could come in through the window. The room looked normal. It felt normal. But once you hear that someone you love has felt invisible hands around their throat in a room, it is hard to walk into that room without remembering it. You begin noticing things you never noticed before. The way the mirror reflects the doorway. The way the shower curtain hangs too still. The way the room seems darker when the hallway light is off. The way you can never see every corner at once. I tried not to think about it too much. I told myself that my mom had probably been scared because she was alone. Maybe she had felt a rush of panic and interpreted it as someone grabbing her. Maybe she was dealing with stress. Maybe the memory had become more frightening every time she told it. That was what I wanted to believe. Then one morning, I saw her in the bathroom. At least I thought I did. It was a normal morning at first. I had woken up in my bedroom and started getting ready to go downstairs. I do not remember if it was a weekend, a school day, or a morning when everyone was moving slowly around the house. I only remember that the house was already awake. I could hear faint sounds coming from downstairs. There was movement in the kitchen. Maybe cabinets opening. Maybe dishes being set out. Maybe something cooking. The smell of breakfast was beginning to drift up through the house, though at the time I was not really paying attention to it. I stepped out of my bedroom and walked toward the bathroom. The bathroom was upstairs, and I expected it to be empty. I may have needed to brush my teeth, wash my face, use the toilet, or simply get ready for the day. It was the kind of ordinary routine that happens without much thought. As I approached the doorway, I saw my mom standing at the mirror. She was facing the sink. Her back was toward me. She looked completely normal. There was nothing strange about her appearance at first. She had the same shape, the same posture, the same hair, and the same clothes I would expect my mom to be wearing around the house in the morning. She was standing close to the sink, looking into the mirror, almost as if she was getting ready. I did not think anything of it. I said something to her. I do not remember exactly what I said. It may have been a simple, good morning. I may have asked her if breakfast was ready. I may have complained about being tired. It could have been anything small and normal. She did not answer. At first, I assumed she did not hear me. Maybe the water was running softly. Maybe she was focused on something in the mirror. Maybe she was just tired and had not fully woken up yet. So I said something again. Still no answer. That should have bothered me more than it did at the time. But when you see someone familiar in a familiar place, your mind automatically makes excuses for them. I thought maybe she was annoyed, distracted, or simply not in the mood to talk. I had seen my mom stand silently in front of a mirror before while brushing her hair, fixing her clothes, or thinking about something. I stood there for another moment. She did not move. She did not turn around. She did not look at me through the mirror. She was just standing there. The bathroom was quiet. I remember feeling a small flicker of discomfort, but I ignored it. Maybe I did not want to bother her. Maybe I assumed she wanted privacy. Maybe I had already gotten used to the idea that she sometimes felt weird in the bathroom, so part of me did not want to stand there too long. I left. I turned away from the bathroom and went downstairs. The stairs were between the upper floor and the kitchen. There was no alternate route that would allow someone to go from upstairs to downstairs without passing through the stairway. If my mom had been standing in the bathroom and then gone to the kitchen, she would have had to walk past me, or at least make enough noise for me to notice. But when I reached the kitchen, my mom was there. She was busy preparing breakfast. She was moving around the stove and counter, completely focused on what she was doing. There were dishes out. Food was being prepared. The kitchen smelled warm and normal. For a moment, I just stood there. I remember staring at her. It took my brain a few seconds to catch up. I had just seen her upstairs. I had just spoken to her in the bathroom. She had been standing in front of the mirror. But now, she was in the kitchen. She looked up at me and noticed I was staring. Maybe she asked what was wrong. Maybe she just gave me a confused look. I do not remember her exact expression, only that she seemed completely normal. I asked her if she had just been upstairs. The question came out more casually than I felt. I did not immediately say that I had seen her in the bathroom. I was trying to make sense of it without sounding strange. She looked at me funny. She said no. I asked again. I said, "Were you just in the bathroom?" She told me she had been in the kitchen the whole morning. She said she had been preparing breakfast. The way she said it made it clear that she had not just come downstairs. She had been there for a while. She had things cooking. She had been moving around the kitchen long enough that it would have been impossible for her to have gone upstairs, stood silently in front of the mirror, then returned without me seeing her. I felt cold. Not physically cold at first, but the kind of cold feeling that starts in your stomach and spreads through your body when you realize something does not make sense. I thought about the stairs. I thought about how narrow the house was. I thought about how I had walked directly from my room toward the bathroom and then downstairs. There was no way she could have gone ahead of me. There was no way she could have passed me without me noticing. I had seen her clearly. I had spoken to her. I had watched her stand there at the mirror. But my mom was standing in the kitchen telling me she had not left it all morning. For a second, I wanted to tell her exactly what I had seen. I wanted to say, "Then, who was upstairs?" But I could not make myself say it. I remembered what she had told us before. I remembered the bathroom. I remembered her saying she felt someone watching her while she showered. I remembered the invisible hands around her throat. And suddenly, I did not want her to know that I had seen something in there too. I was afraid she would panic. I was afraid she would think I was trying to scare her. I was afraid that saying it out loud would make it more real. so I said nothing. I acted like I had simply been confused. Maybe I shrugged it off. Maybe I changed the subject. Maybe I sat down and tried to eat breakfast like nothing had happened. But inside, I was terrified. The entire time I was downstairs, I kept thinking about the bathroom. I pictured the person I had seen standing at the mirror. I tried to remember every detail. Had I really seen my mom's face? No, she had been turned away from me. I had only seen the back of her. I had seen her hair, her shoulders, her clothes, the way she stood. Everything about her looked like my mom. But she never turned around. She never answered me. She never acknowledged that I was there. That detail kept coming back to me. What if I had only assumed it was my mom because she was standing in a place where I expected my mom to be? What if I had seen someone else wearing something similar? What if I had been tired and mistaken a reflection, a shadow, or a piece of clothing for a person? That was what I tried to tell myself. Maybe the mirror and the low light had created an illusion. Maybe there was a towel hanging somewhere that looked like hair. Maybe the bathroom door had been partly open, and I saw my own reflection at an angle without realizing it. Maybe I had been half asleep. Maybe I had sleepwalked out of my room and dreamed the whole thing. There were many possible explanations, but none of them fit the feeling of the moment. I did not see a vague shadow. I did not see something in the corner of my eye. I saw a person standing in front of the mirror. I saw someone who looked exactly like my mom. Later, after breakfast, I went back upstairs. I did not want to. I honestly wanted to stay downstairs where the house felt busy and safe. The kitchen was full of light, sound, and movement. My mom was there. My family was there. Everything felt normal, but I also needed to know. I needed to look. I walked slowly up the stairs. Each step felt louder than it should have. I remember listening carefully for sounds upstairs. I expected to hear water running or someone moving inside the bathroom. I expected to hear a door close. There was nothing. When I reached the hallway, I stopped. The bathroom door was open. I could see inside. It was empty. The mirror reflected the sink, the counter, and part of the doorway. There was nobody standing there. No shadow behind the curtain. No movement near the cabinets. No sign that anyone had been in the room at all. The room looked exactly as it always did. Ordinary, still, empty. I stepped inside and looked around more carefully. I checked behind the shower curtain, even though I knew nobody could reasonably be hiding there. I looked toward the window. I looked at the door. I stared at the mirror for a while, almost expecting to see someone appear behind me. Nothing happened. But I could not shake the feeling that the bathroom had changed. Once you see something in a familiar room that should not be there, the room never feels completely familiar again. I started avoiding it when I could. Not in an obvious way. I still had to use the bathroom. I still brushed my teeth. I still went in there during the day. But I stopped lingering. I did not stand in front of the mirror for long. I kept the door open more often. I did not like being alone in there when the house was quiet. I especially hated looking into the mirror after that. Mirrors are strange when you are already scared. Normally, they are just mirrors. You use them without thinking. You look at yourself, brush your hair, wash your face, check your clothes, and move on. But after seeing someone who looked like my mom standing in front of that mirror, I began noticing how much of the room it reflected. If you stood at the sink, you could see the doorway behind you. You could see part of the hallway. You could see the shower curtain. You could see a dark corner that was not directly in your line of sight. Sometimes I would glance into it and feel my heart speed up, convinced I would see someone behind me. I never did. Not clearly. but the possibility stayed with me. I thought about telling my mom eventually. There were moments when I almost did. I would remember the incident while we were talking, and I would think, maybe I should tell her. Maybe she deserves to know someone else saw something too. But then I remembered how frightened she had been by the feeling in the bathroom. I remembered her describing hands around her neck. I did not want to add to that fear. What would I even say? Mom, I saw someone who looked exactly like you in the bathroom, but you were downstairs the whole time. There was no way to say it without making it sound impossible, and I was not even sure I believed it myself. Maybe I had been sleepwalking. That explanation stayed with me for a long time. Maybe I had woken up, walked into the hallway, and started dreaming with my eyes open. Maybe I had seen the image of my mom because I expected her to be there. Maybe my mind had put her in the bathroom because she had told us so many times about feeling a presence there. Maybe I was projecting what I expected to see. That could happen. If you know someone is usually in the kitchen in the morning, your brain can fill in details. If you are tired, you can mistake shapes. If you are anxious, you can turn a reflection into a person. But there was something about the silence that bothered me. I had talked to her. Twice, I think. She did not answer. She did not turn around. She did not react. If it had been a simple misunderstanding, why did it feel like she was listening? Why did she look so much like my mom from behind? Why did I only realize something was wrong after I saw my real mom downstairs? I still do not know what happened. Maybe it was just a strange waking dream. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. Maybe I had carried too many of my mom's stories about the bathroom into my own mind, and when I walked past it, I saw exactly what I was afraid of seeing. Or maybe I saw something that wanted to look familiar. Something that stood in front of the mirror and wore my mom's shape, because it knew that was the person I would expect to see. That is the thought that still makes my skin crawl, not the idea of a ghost. Not even the idea of something in the bathroom. It is the idea that I saw my mother standing there, spoke to her, and did not realize until later that she had never been there at all. Even now, when I walk past a bathroom with the light on and see someone reflected in the mirror, I sometimes think about that morning. I remember the silent figure at the sink. I remember the way it never turned around. And I remember finding my real mom downstairs, completely unaware that someone else had been standing in her place. I was around 10 or 11 years old when this happened. At the time, my family lived way out in the backwoods of Deep South Oklahoma, on about 20 acres of land. It sounds like we were living on some big working farm, but we were not. There were no barns full of animals, no crops, no tractors, and no real farm life happening on our property. The land had been cheap, and my parents were struggling financially, so it was what they could afford. We had a farmhouse, a lot of dirt, a lot of trees, and enough open land around us that I could wander for hours without seeing another person. As a kid, I loved it. I spent most of my time outside whenever I was allowed to. There was always something to do. I climbed trees, followed animal tracks, built little forts out of branches, searched through brush piles, and made trails through areas where no real trail existed. I knew the land around our house better than I knew most streets in town. The house sat far enough away from the road that the world felt distant. The nearest neighbors were not close enough to casually walk over to. You could see parts of their actual farmland from certain places on our property, but there was enough space, trees, and open field between us that it still felt like we lived in the middle of nowhere. The land was rough in places. There were patches of dry grass, uneven dirt, thorny brush, and tree lines that seemed to go on forever. In summer, the heat could make the entire area look faded and dusty. In winter, the wind moved through the open fields with nothing to stop it. At night, the darkness was complete in a way that people from cities probably would not understand. There were no streetlights, no headlights passing every few minutes, no houses glowing nearby, just the moon, the stars, distant sounds from the woods, and the occasional porch light from our place. During the day, though, it was perfect for a kid who liked being outside. I would leave the house after breakfast and not come back until I was hungry, thirsty, or called in. My parents knew I was usually somewhere on the property. They trusted that I would not go too far, though I probably went farther than they realized sometimes. One day, I was out playing like usual. I do not remember exactly what I had been doing before I saw it. I may have been walking through the tree line, pretending I was exploring. I may have been looking for sticks or rocks. It could have been any ordinary afternoon, because that is how the memory begins for me. Nothing felt strange at first. The air was warm. The land was dry. The woods around me made their usual noises. I could hear insects, birds, and wind moving lightly through the leaves. Farther away, there may have been the faint sound of something from the neighboring farm, but not enough to make me pay attention. Then I saw smoke. It was not close to the house. It was coming from a field near the neighboring property, close enough that I could see the plume rising above the grass and trees. At first, I assumed somebody was burning something. Out there, that was not impossible. People burned brush. They cleared debris. They lit small fires to get rid of things. Sometimes smoke drifted across the land from a distance. But this looked different. The smoke was thick. It was rising steadily, not just drifting in a small gray cloud. It looked like there was a real fire burning somewhere in the field. Even from where I was standing, I could see it lifting into the sky. My first instinct was curiosity. I was a kid. I did not think about danger in the same way an adult would. I saw smoke in a field and wanted to know what was causing it. Maybe someone needed help. Maybe one of the neighbors was doing something interesting. Maybe there was a big brush fire. So I started running toward it. The farther I went, the more certain I became that there was a bonfire. I could smell smoke in the air by then. It had that dry, burning grass smell mixed with something heavier, like wood or old brush. The wind carried it toward me in short waves. I could hear something too, though I could not make it out at first. Voices, a lot of voices. Not normal conversation. Not a few people talking while standing around a fire. It sounded louder than that. It was rhythmic. There were bursts of shouting, chanting, and sharp calls that rose and fell together. The sound made me slow down before I reached the edge of the field. I remember crouching near the trees. I did not want whoever was out there to see me immediately. At first, I thought maybe there was some kind of gathering. Maybe people from the neighboring property were having a party. Maybe it was a group of adults drinking around a fire. Maybe there was some event I did not know about. Then, I looked out into the field. There was a huge bonfire burning. It was much bigger than I expected. The flames rose high enough that I could see them clearly even from the edge of the woods. The fire threw orange light across the dry grass, and smoke climbed straight upward before bending slightly in the wind. Around the fire were people. A lot of people. I remember thinking there had to be 30 or 40 of them. They were moving in a circle around the fire, dancing, at least. That is the closest word I have for it. Their movements were not casual. They were not just walking around or standing and talking. They were moving in a way that seemed deliberate and connected, circling the flames while voices rose around them. I was 10 or 11 years old, and I did not understand what I was seeing. But I remember looking at them and thinking they looked like Native Americans from another time. Not like people in costumes at a school event. Not like something from a movie set. Not like a group of people dressed up for a themed party. It felt older than that. The clothing looked unfamiliar to me. The sounds they were making were unfamiliar. The entire scene looked wrong against the field I knew. It felt like I had walked into something that did not belong in my time. I remember being completely still. I stayed at the edge of the forest, half hidden behind trees and brush, staring into the field. The bonfire flickered in the open space. The people kept moving around it. Their voices carried across the field in bursts. I could not understand the words, but they did not sound like English. They sounded like chanting or shouting in another language, loud enough that I could hear the rhythm but not the meaning. It felt authentic in a way I could not explain. That word is hard to use because I was a child. I did not know enough about indigenous languages, ceremonies, or history to say what was actually happening. I did not know whether the people I saw were real, whether they were reenactors, whether it was a dream, or whether my mind filled in things after the fact. All I knew in that moment was that the scene looked real. The fire was real. The smoke was real. The voices were real. And the people around it looked like they had stepped out of the past. I remember watching for what felt like an hour. It may not have been that long. Time becomes strange when you are a kid, especially when you are scared or confused. It could have been 10 minutes. It could have been 20. But I remember sitting at the edge of the trees, barely breathing, trying to understand why there were dozens of people dancing around a giant bonfire in a field near our house. I was not sure whether I should run. Part of me wanted to get closer because I was curious. Part of me was terrified that one of them would notice me. The more I watched, the more unreal it felt. The fires seemed too bright against the open field. The people seemed too focused on what they were doing to notice anything around them. There was no music that I could hear, no vehicles nearby, no sign of a modern gathering. I did not see trucks, tents, chairs, coolers, or anything else that would normally be there if a group of people had gathered on someone's land. It was just the fire, the field, the voices, and the people moving around it. At some point, I could not take it anymore. I got scared enough that I decided I had to tell my parents. I ran. I remember turning away from the field and sprinting through the trees and grass toward the house. I did not look back much. I was afraid that if I looked over my shoulder, I would see somebody following me. The run back felt long, but the area itself was not that far from our house. The particular section of field was maybe a 10-minute run from our back door if you moved fast enough. It was close enough that I knew I could get my dad there quickly, but far enough that nobody from the house could see what was happening. I burst through the door or into the yard and started trying to explain. I told my dad there were people in the field. I told him there was a huge fire. I told him there were dozens of Native Americans dancing around it. I probably sounded wild. I was a scared kid, out of breath, talking too fast, trying to describe something that made no sense. I remember my dad looking at me with that tired, skeptical expression adults sometimes have when a child comes in with a huge story. I think he was bored. Maybe he thought I had gotten carried away playing outside. Maybe he assumed I had seen smoke from a brush fire and made the rest up. Maybe he thought I had been watching something on television earlier and mixed it into my imagination. He rolled his eyes, but he followed me. Even if he did not believe me, he knew I was upset enough that he needed to check. We headed out behind the house, across the land, toward the field where I had seen the fire. I was trying to hurry him. I kept telling him that it was right there. I kept expecting to see the smoke as soon as we reached the edge of the trees. I kept waiting to hear the chanting again. But as we got closer, I started to feel something was wrong. There was no smoke. The sky above the field was clear. There was no orange glow, no loud voices, no movement. I remember slowing down. My dad kept walking forward. Then we reached the place where I had been sitting. And there was nothing there. No fire, no people, no footprints that I could see. No burned wood, no ash, no smoke hanging in the air. Nothing. The field was empty. The grass was dead and dry in patches, just like it had been before. There was no circle burned into the ground. There was no sign that a giant bonfire had been there minutes earlier. There was no sign that 30 or 40 people had gathered in that spot. My dad looked around. I remember pointing. I told him that was where the fire had been. I told him the people were there, around it. I told him I had watched them. But there was nothing to show him. He probably thought I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe he thought he was humoring me by walking out there. Maybe he expected to find a little smoke from someone burning leaves. Maybe he thought I was seeing something in the distance and mistaking it for something else. But there was nothing. No explanation. I remember standing there and feeling embarrassed, angry, and scared all at once. Embarrassed because my dad probably thought I was making it up. Angry because I knew what I had seen. And scared because the fact that it was gone made it more frightening than if the fire had still been burning. If there had been a normal gathering, there would have been signs. If people had been dancing around a bonfire, there would have been footprints in the grass. There would have been ash. There would have been burned wood. There would have been a smell. There would have been something. But the field looked untouched. My dad may have said something like, "There's nothing here," or "You probably saw smoke from somewhere else." I do not remember his exact words. I only remember how certain I felt. I knew where I had been standing. I knew what the field looked like. I knew where the fire had been. I knew I had not just imagined it. That part has never changed. People can tell me I was young. They can tell me memory gets distorted. They can say that time and fear make childhood moments feel bigger than they were. They can say I saw a controlled burn from far away, or a group of people doing something ordinary that my brain turned into a historical scene. They can say I saw smoke and shadows and filled in the rest because I knew I lived in Oklahoma. I understand all of that, but I still remember it like it happened yesterday. I remember the smoke rising. I remember the sound of many voices. I remember the giant fire in the middle of the field. I remember the people moving around it. I remember the feeling that I was watching something from another time. And I remember how quickly it was all gone when I returned with my dad. The area where we lived was right in the middle of land connected to the Trail of Tears. That was something I knew even when I was young, at least in a basic way. Oklahoma carries a lot of history. There are places where the past does not feel far away, even if you do not understand every detail as a kid. I do not claim to know who those people were. I do not claim to know what language I heard. I do not know whether it was some kind of vision, a dreamlike experience, a misunderstanding, or something impossible. I only know that it did not feel like a normal group of people having a bonfire. It felt like I was looking backward through time. It felt like the field had opened up for a moment and shown me something that should not have been there anymore. That was not the only strange thing that happened in that house either. There were other moments over the years that felt close to supernatural. Things that could be explained away one at a time, but together made the property feel different. Strange noises at night. Feelings of being watched in certain parts of the land. Moments where the woods seemed too quiet, like everything around us had stopped moving at once. But that fire was the one that stayed with me the most. Because it was not just a sound. It was not a shadow. It was not a strange dream I could blame on waking up in the middle of the night. It happened outside, in daylight. I was awake. I was standing at the edge of the woods. I watched it for what felt like forever. And when I came back with my dad, it was gone. 20 years later, I still remember the exact feeling in my chest when I first saw the smoke. I remember running toward it because I was curious. I remember stopping at the trees when I realized what I was looking at. I remember thinking that none of it made sense. And I remember standing in that empty field afterward, trying to explain something that nobody else had seen. People can believe whatever they want. They can say I was too young to remember clearly. They can say I misunderstood what was happening. They can say the past and the landscape got mixed together in my imagination. But I know what I saw. I saw a fire burning in an empty field. I saw a crowd of people moving around it. I heard voices that did not sound like anything I knew. And for a few minutes, standing alone at the edge of the forest, I felt like I was watching history happen right in front of me. About 3 years ago, I went to visit my grandmother at her house in the woods. She lives in a very secluded area, far enough away from town that the road eventually becomes narrow and quiet before you reach her place. The trees around her property are thick, old, and close together. Even during the day, some parts of the woods look darker than they should because the branches block out so much sunlight. The land around her home has a history too. The woods were once part of an old battleground. People in the area talk about it sometimes, though not always seriously. There are stories about soldiers moving through the trees, about old paths that used to lead to camps, and about things people claim to have seen at night. I never paid much attention to those stories. My grandmother had lived in that house for most of her life. My grandparents built it in the 1950s, long after anything connected to the battleground had happened. To me, it was just Grandma's house. It was old, quiet, and full of family memories. I had been there many times growing up, but there was always something about it that made me uncomfortable. Maybe it was how isolated it was. Maybe it was the woods surrounding it on every side. Maybe it was how dark the inside of the house could get, even in the afternoon. My grandmother is extremely frugal. She has always been careful with money, especially when it comes to electricity. She hates wasting lights. She will sit in a room that is nearly dark rather than turn on a lamp before she thinks it is absolutely necessary. She prefers natural sunlight during the day and candles at night. It is just how she is. She will open windows to let in air instead of using the air conditioning too much. She will sit near a window rather than turn on a light. She will tell you that people pay too much money to keep every room bright when the sun is perfectly free. On this particular visit, it was around 5 in the afternoon. The sun was still out, but it was beginning to lower. It was not bright enough to fill the house completely, and it was not dark enough that anyone felt like turning on lights. The front part of the house had some natural light coming through the windows, but the farther back you went, the dimmer everything became. My grandmother, my aunt, and I were all sitting in the living room near the front of the house. We were having one of those ordinary conversations that families have when nobody is in a rush. My grandmother was talking about something small that had happened during the week. My aunt was listening and responding. I was mostly sitting there, half paying attention and half looking around the room. Nothing felt strange at first. The house was quiet in the usual way. You could hear the faint sounds of the wind outside. Branches moved against one another somewhere in the trees. Every now and then, the wood in the house made a small creak, but it was an old house, so that was normal. At some point, my grandmother asked me to go get her hairbrush from her bedroom. Her room was at the far back of the house. To get there, I had to walk down a long hallway that ran through the middle of the house. There were bedrooms on both sides of it. My grandmother always kept the doors open, even when nobody was using the rooms. She said it helped air out the house. She kept the windows open too, whenever the weather allowed it. The breeze would move through the rooms, and she liked the way it made the house feel less closed in. But because the rooms were mostly empty, leaving all the doors open made the hallway feel strange. Each bedroom had a bed and a dresser. That was usually it. No lamps turned on, no people inside, no television playing, no sounds. Just empty rooms opening onto a long, dim hallway. I got up from the living room and started walking toward the back of the house. At first, everything was normal. The farther I went, the quieter it became. The voices from the living room faded behind me. I could still hear them faintly, but they sounded distant, almost swallowed by the hallway and the rooms around it. There was enough daylight coming in through the open windows that I could see where I was going. But the rooms on either side of me were darker than the hallway. The sunlight did not reach every corner. Some areas near the walls and behind the beds were shadowed. As I walked, I could see into each room out of the corner of my eye. An empty bed, a dresser, an open window, thin curtains moving gently. Then another room, another empty bed, another dresser, another open window. There was nothing unusual about any of it, but I remember feeling uncomfortable anyway. It is strange how an empty room can feel more unsettling than a full one. When people are in a house, you hear them. You hear doors, footsteps, dishes, water running, conversation, someone moving from room to room. But in those empty bedrooms, there was nothing. Just furniture, open doors, and shadows in places where no one should have been standing. I reached my grandmother's room at the end of the hallway. Her room was a little brighter than the others because one of the windows faced the side of the property where the trees were thinner. I walked in, found the hairbrush where she usually kept it, and picked it up. Then I turned around and started back toward the living room. I had only taken 2 steps into the hallway when I heard a creak. It was not loud. It was the sound of a floorboard shifting beneath weight. At first, I thought it came from one of the rooms beside me. Maybe the house was settling. Maybe the wind had moved a door. Maybe my grandmother or aunt had gotten up and started walking down the hall. But then something changed. A heavy feeling came over me. It is hard to explain. It was not just fear. It was not a sudden thought that made me nervous. It felt physical, like the air itself had become heavier around me. My chest tightened. My skin went cold. The hallway suddenly felt smaller, darker, and much farther away from the living room than it had a few seconds earlier. I stopped walking. The hairbrush was still in my hand. For a moment, I did not want to look anywhere. I just stood there, listening. Then I looked toward the bedroom, closest to my right. There was a man standing inside. He was large, not just tall, but broad and heavy-looking, as if he filled more of the room than a normal person should. He was standing near the bed, facing the doorway. He was covered in dirt and blood. His clothes looked old. At first, my mind could not understand what I was seeing. I thought he might be someone who had broken into the house. I thought maybe he was injured. I thought maybe someone had come in from the woods and was hiding in one of the empty bedrooms. But the longer I looked, the more wrong he seemed. His clothes did not look modern. They looked like some kind of old military uniform. Not a costume in the normal sense. Not something someone would wear for a party. The fabric looked dark and worn. There was dirt on it, and there were dark stains that looked like dried blood. His face looked pale beneath the grime. His eyes were fixed directly on me. He did not move. He did not say anything. He just stared. I remember feeling like I forgot how to breathe. I did not scream. I did not drop the hairbrush. I did not ask who he was. My body simply reacted before my mind could catch up. I turned and ran. I ran back down that hallway as fast as I could. I did not look into any of the other rooms. I did not stop to see whether the man followed me. I did not even think about the fact that my grandmother and aunt were still sitting in the living room. I only knew that there was a huge blood-covered man standing in one of the rooms, and I needed to get everyone out of the house. When I reached the living room, I must have looked completely terrified. My grandmother and aunt both looked up at me. I tried to tell them what I had seen, but I do not remember getting the words out clearly. I remember grabbing my grandmother, trying to pull her up, and telling her we had to leave. She was confused. My aunt was confused too. They kept asking what was wrong, but I was too panicked to explain. I did not want to stand there talking about it while that man might be walking down the hallway behind me. My grandmother was not light, and I did not know what else to do, so I tried to carry her. I grabbed her and started moving toward the door. She was protesting the entire time. She kept telling me to put her down, asking what I thought I was doing. My aunt came after us, trying to understand why I was suddenly dragging Grandma out of the house like there was a fire. I got my grandmother outside. The air outside felt colder than it had before. I remember the open yard, the trees around the house, and the light from the setting sun touching the tops of the branches. Everything looked normal, which somehow made the whole thing feel even more unreal. My grandmother told me to put her down. I did. My aunt was standing nearby, looking between us. My grandmother asked what was wrong. I told her I had seen someone inside. I told her there was a man in one of the bedrooms down the hallway. I was still shaking. My words were probably coming out too fast. I told her he was big, dirty, covered in blood, and standing there staring at me. Then my grandmother asked something that made me stop. She said, "Was it a man?" I looked at her, confused. Of course it was a man. I told her yes. Then she asked, "He was dirty and looked hurt, right?" I did not answer right away. She continued, "He had on a uniform too?" That was when the image came back into my mind clearly. The man's clothes, the old-looking jacket, the strange shape of the fabric, the way he stood in the room like he belonged to another time. I had been so terrified that I had not fully processed it at first. I thought I was seeing an injured home intruder. But when my grandmother said uniform, I knew exactly what she meant. He was dressed like an old soldier. My stomach dropped. I looked at my grandmother, expecting her to be scared too. But she was calm, not completely casual, but calm in a way that made it obvious this was not the first time she had heard about him. She was looking at me like she understood exactly who I was describing. I asked her why she knew what he looked like. I asked why she was not afraid. I asked her if she knew him. For a second, she did not answer. Then she gave a small laugh, like I had asked something obvious. She said, "He came with the house." That was her exact attitude about it. He came with the house. I did not know what to say. I had just run through the house convinced there was a dangerous man inside. I had tried to carry my grandmother out because I thought we were in immediate danger. And now she was standing outside, acting like I had simply seen an old piece of furniture she had forgotten to mention. I asked her what she meant. She said she had always seen him there. Not all the time, but enough. She said he had been around since she and my grandfather built the house. She said he would appear in the hallway, in the rooms, or near the back of the house. Sometimes she would see him standing still. Sometimes she would only feel that he was there. She said he never bothered her. That was the part she cared about most. As long as he did not bother her, she did not bother him. I stood there, looking at her, completely stunned. My grandparents built that house in the 1950s. It had been their home for decades. I had always thought of it as a normal family house in the woods, a place where people gathered for holidays, birthdays, dinners, and visits. But my grandmother had apparently been living with something she believed was a ghost for years. Not just a vague presence, not just a strange sound. A man in an old uniform. A man covered in dirt and blood. A man who stood in bedrooms and stared down the hallway. My aunt was quiet during all of this. She had followed us out of the house, and I could tell she did not want to make the situation worse. She is not the kind of person who likes confrontation or arguments. She did not say much. She did not tell me I was imagining things. She did not laugh it off. She mostly stood there and listened. I kept asking my grandmother questions. I asked how long he had been there. She said she had seen him for as long as she could remember living in the house. I asked whether he had ever spoken. She said no. I asked whether he had ever touched her. She said not exactly. But then she began telling me more things. She said there were times when people had been locked inside rooms even though there were no locks on the doors. She said people would try to open a bedroom door and find that it would not move. Then, after a few minutes, it would open normally as if nothing had happened. She said the window blinds sometimes moved by themselves. They would go up or down without anyone touching them. Sometimes a window would be open after she had closed it. Sometimes a door would be shut after she left it open. She said she had learned not to react too much. In her mind, the man was part of the house. Maybe he had been there before the house was built. Maybe he belonged to the land. Maybe he had died somewhere in the woods during whatever battle had taken place there long ago. She did not claim to know exactly, but she believed that if she treated him with respect, he would leave her alone. That was her rule. Do not mess with him. Do not challenge him. Do not act afraid. Just let him be. I could not understand how she could live like that. I was 17 or 18 at the time, old enough to know that I had seen something terrifying, but still young enough that the whole situation felt impossible. I wanted someone to tell me it had not happened. I wanted my aunt to say my grandmother was joking. I wanted to believe there was a normal explanation for the man in the bedroom. Maybe it had been a reflection. Maybe it had been a shadow from the trees. Maybe the setting sun had made the empty room look strange. Maybe I had been tired, anxious, or seeing things in my peripheral vision. But I had looked directly at him. He had been standing there. He had been staring at me. And my grandmother knew exactly what he looked like before I described the uniform. That was the part I could not get past. I did not spend the night at my grandmother's house after that. I went to my aunt's house instead. I made an excuse at first, but I think everyone knew why. I did not want to walk down that hallway again. I did not want to be in the back part of the house after dark. I did not want to sleep knowing that there was supposedly a dead soldier moving between the empty bedrooms. From that point on, I only visited my grandmother during the daytime. Even then, I stayed near the front of the house. I would sit in the living room. I would help in the kitchen. I would talk to her outside. But I avoided the back hallway whenever I could. If she asked me to get something from her room, I would find a reason not to go. I would say I was busy. I would ask if my aunt could get it. I would wait until someone else was walking that direction. But I never went down that hallway alone again. The strange thing is that my grandmother never seemed afraid. She would talk about the man as if he were an unpleasant neighbor she had learned to live with. Not a friend, not someone she liked, but someone who belonged there in his own way. She would say he never hurt her. She would say he only caused little problems. The blinds, the doors, the rooms that would not open. She seemed to believe that as long as she did not disturb him, she was safe. That should have made me feel better. It did not. It made me think about all the years she had lived there alone, or nearly alone. It made me wonder how many times she had seen him and never told anyone. It made me wonder whether he was still standing in one of those empty rooms whenever the house got quiet. Most of my cousins do not believe me. They think it is an elaborate prank. They think my grandmother is siding with me because she finds the story funny or because she wants to scare them. They say there is no way she really sees an old soldier in the house. They say people in the family are just exaggerating old stories. Maybe that would be easier to believe if my grandmother had acted scared or dramatic. But she did not. That is what makes it feel real to me. She was not trying to scare anyone. She was not telling a ghost story around a campfire. She was simply explaining something she had lived with for years. My aunt does not help much when my cousins ask her about it. She gets quiet. She does not say I am lying. She does not say it did not happen. But she also does not want to argue with anyone. She avoids the topic and lets people believe whatever they want. So most of my cousins still think I made it up. They think I saw a shadow, panicked, and created the rest afterward. Maybe they are right. Maybe there is a completely normal explanation for everything. Maybe the shape I saw in the room was some mix of fading daylight, furniture, and fear. Maybe my grandmother has heard local stories about the battleground for so long that she began interpreting normal things as paranormal. Maybe the doors and blinds have old mechanisms that sometimes stick or move when the house shifts. I cannot prove otherwise. But I know what happened to me. I know I walked down that hallway carrying my grandmother's hairbrush. I know I heard the floor creak. I know the air suddenly felt heavy. And I know I looked into that room and saw a large man standing there, dirty and bloody, wearing what looked like an old soldier's uniform. He did not say a word. He did not move toward me. He only stared. That was enough. Even now, when I visit my grandmother, I do not go down that hallway. Not alone. Not at night. Not under any circumstances. Because whether he is a ghost, a shadow, an old story, or something my mind will never fully understand, I know one thing for sure. I do not want to see him again. When I was a kid, my family and I used to live in Italy. The house we lived in had more space than I was comfortable with at that age. Looking back now, it probably was not enormous, but when you are a child, any house with more than one floor can feel huge at night. The shower was upstairs. That was the part I hated most. Usually, my parents would be downstairs cooking while I was told to go take a shower. The kitchen was on the lower floor, and I would hear the sounds of dinner being made while I was supposed to go upstairs by myself. I could hear pans clinking, cupboards opening, water running in the sink, and my parents talking to each other from below. Those sounds should have made me feel better. They should have reminded me that I was not alone in the house. But for some reason, they made the distance feel worse. I would stand at the bottom of the stairs and listen to my family downstairs, then look up at the darker part of the house above me. The staircase led into a space that always felt quieter than the rest of the home. The upstairs rooms were separated from the kitchen, separated from the noise, and separated from the people I trusted most. To an adult, it was probably only a short walk. To me, it felt like going somewhere far away. I hated being told to shower upstairs. I would try to avoid it whenever I could. I would take too long to get my towel. I would say I was not tired yet. I would ask if I could shower later. Sometimes I would stand in my room pretending to look for clothes, hoping my parents would forget or get distracted. But eventually, I would have to go. I would carry my pajamas and towel upstairs, trying not to look too nervous. I did not want my parents to think I was being silly. I did not have a clear reason for being scared. Nothing had happened to me in that house that I could point to. I had not seen a person in the hall or heard a voice calling my name. I was just afraid. Afraid of the quiet. Afraid of the space between rooms. Afraid of not being able to hear my family clearly once the bathroom door was shut and the shower was running. The bathroom itself was not especially strange. It was a normal bathroom. There was a shower, a sink, a mirror, and the usual things you would expect. But when I was alone upstairs, it felt like the room belonged to a different part of the house. The light always seemed harsher up there. The hallway outside the bathroom always seemed darker. The sound of the pipes seemed louder. And once I got into the shower, the running water blocked out everything else. That was what scared me most. When the shower was on, I could not hear my parents downstairs anymore. The cooking sounds disappeared. Their voices disappeared. The entire house became muffled behind the sound of water. I would stand under the shower and keep looking toward the curtain or the bathroom door, even though I knew it was closed. I would imagine hearing footsteps outside. I would imagine someone standing in the hallway. I would imagine something entering the bathroom while I had my eyes closed washing shampoo out of my hair. As a child, I was convinced that showers were one of the worst possible places to be alone. You are exposed. You cannot hear properly. You cannot see through the shower curtain. You have water in your ears. You are expected to keep your eyes closed, at least part of the time. Every horror movie scene I had accidentally seen or heard about seemed to make showers worse. Even without watching anything scary, it felt wrong to stand behind a thin curtain while the rest of the room was hidden. I would shower as quickly as possible. I would wash my hair fast, rinse off, grab my towel, and get dressed before I had a chance to imagine too much. Then I would race downstairs toward the kitchen, relieved to hear my parents again. Sometimes they would ask why I was in such a hurry. I would probably just shrug or say I was done. I did not know how to explain that the upstairs part of the house made me feel disconnected from everyone. I did not know how to explain that I felt safer when I could hear normal life happening around me. The strange thing was that nothing ever actually happened in Italy. At least, nothing that I remember. No screams, no footsteps, no shadow under the bathroom door, no person standing in the hall. The fear was mostly inside my own head. But that did not make it less real at the time. When you are a kid, fear does not always need a reason. A dark room can be enough. A quiet staircase can be enough. A door that does not close all the way can be enough. You know logically that your parents are downstairs, but your body still reacts as though you have been left alone somewhere unsafe. For years, I associated showers with that feeling. I associated them with being separated from everyone else. I associated them with the noise of running water covering up every other sound in the house. Eventually, we moved away from Italy. A few years later, we ended up living in Tennessee. The house in Tennessee was much smaller. It was nothing like the place we had lived in before. The rooms were closer together, the hallways were shorter, and there was no long stairway leading to an upstairs bathroom. The bathroom was on the same floor as the kitchen, only a short distance down the hall. It should have felt safer, and in some ways it did. I could hear my family more easily. If my parents were in the kitchen, I could usually hear cabinets opening, dishes moving, or someone talking. The bathroom did not feel like it was separated from the rest of the house by an entire floor. I did not have to climb upstairs alone. I did not have to walk through a dark hallway that felt too far away from everyone else. But the old fear never disappeared completely. Even in the smaller house, I still felt uneasy in the shower sometimes. I think part of it was habit. My brain had learned to associate showers with being alone and vulnerable. Even though the setting had changed, I still had that feeling in the back of my mind. I would close the bathroom door, turn on the water, pull the curtain shut, and suddenly feel like I needed to listen for every sound in the house. Sometimes I would convince myself there was someone in the hallway. Sometimes I would hear a floorboard shift and immediately stop moving. Sometimes I would hear pipes make a noise in the wall and imagine it was something much worse. I knew it was probably just anxiety. I knew I was getting in my own head. But knowing that and feeling it are two different things. One night, when I was still young, I went to take a shower in the Tennessee house. I do not remember exactly what had made me anxious that evening. Maybe I had watched something unsettling earlier. Maybe I had had a bad day. Maybe I was tired and already on edge for no clear reason. Whatever the reason, I remember feeling more nervous than usual before I even got in. The bathroom light was on. The hallway outside was normal. My family was home. Nothing looked strange, but I had that feeling in my chest that something was wrong. Not a specific warning, just a heavy, uncomfortable anxiety that made every small thing feel important. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was being ridiculous. The bathroom was only a few steps from the kitchen. My brother was somewhere in the house. My parents were nearby. There was no reason for me to be scared. I got into the shower. The water was warm. At first, nothing happened. I stood there trying to relax. I washed my hair, let the water run over my shoulders, and tried to focus on ordinary things. The soap smell, the steam collecting around the bathroom, the sound of water hitting the tub. But I could not stop thinking about the curtain. The curtain was closed. On the other side of it was the rest of the bathroom, the sink, the mirror, the door, the hallway beyond it. I kept imagining that if I pulled the curtain aside, someone would be standing there. I knew that was irrational. I knew it was only the old fear from Italy following me into a different house. Still, I was tense. Then I heard the scream. It was loud, abrupt, and full of anger. It was not a small yelp or a distant noise from outside. It sounded like a person screaming at the top of their lungs, as though they were furious, terrified, or in pain. It was one of the harshest sounds I had ever heard. The scream seemed to come from very close by. Maybe just outside the bathroom, maybe from the hallway, maybe from somewhere inside the house. It hit so suddenly that I froze. For a few seconds, I could not even make myself move. The shower water continued running, but I barely noticed it. My heart started pounding so hard that it felt like I could hear it over the water. Every part of me went tight. I remember staring at the shower curtain. I did not want to open it. I knew that was the only thing to do if I wanted to find out what had happened, but I could not make myself move right away. I was terrified that I would pull it aside and find someone standing there. My mind immediately went to the worst possibilities. Maybe someone had broken into the house. Maybe my brother was hurt. Maybe my parents were yelling for help. Maybe someone was in the hallway. Maybe the sound had come from inside the bathroom itself. I stood there, trying to listen. But after the scream, there was nothing. No second scream. No footsteps. No door slamming. No voices. No sound of someone running down the hall. Nothing. That silence made it worse. If someone had screamed in anger, there should have been more noise. There should have been shouting, or movement, or someone calling out. But there was only the shower running and the sound of water dripping from the curtain. I finally forced myself to open it. I grabbed the edge and pulled it aside. The bathroom was empty. Nobody was standing by the sink. Nobody was behind the door. Nobody was in the hallway. The mirror reflected the same frightened face I had expected to see. I stepped out of the shower quickly, wrapped myself in a towel, and looked around the room again. Nothing. The door was closed. The window was closed. The light was still on. There was no sign that anyone had been near the bathroom at all. For a few seconds, I considered calling out. I almost yelled for my parents, but I stopped myself. I was scared that nobody would answer. I was scared they would answer and tell me nothing had happened. I was scared that if I said I heard a scream, everyone would look at me like I was imagining things. Still, I eventually left the bathroom and went to find my family. I asked my brother if he had screamed. He looked confused. I asked my parents if they had heard anything. They had no idea what I was talking about. None of them had screamed. None of them had heard a scream. None of them had heard anything loud enough to make them stop what they were doing. That made no sense to me. The sound had seemed so loud that I could not understand how nobody else heard it. It had not sounded like a faint noise from outside. It had sounded close, sharp, and violent enough that I thought someone must be in danger. But my family acted completely normal. They did not look scared. They did not seem like they were hiding something. They had not heard a thing. I remember trying to explain it. I told them it was a scream. Not just any scream. It was angry. Sudden. Loud enough that it made me freeze. I told them it sounded like it came from outside the bathroom or somewhere right near me. But they could not give me an answer. Maybe they thought I had heard something through the pipes. Maybe they assumed I had gotten scared by a sound from outside. Maybe they believed I had heard something, but did not know what. Or maybe they thought I had imagined it. At that age, I could not decide which possibility scared me more. The idea that there had been a scream and nobody else heard it was frightening. But the idea that my own mind could create a scream so real that I believed it came from the hallway was frightening too. I have thought about it a lot since then. I know I was anxious. I know I had a long history of feeling scared in showers, starting from when we lived in Italy. I know I was already in my own head that night. I had probably been listening too carefully, expecting something bad to happen. It is possible that I had an auditory hallucination. Maybe the running water, the pipes, and my anxiety blended together into something my brain interpreted as a scream. Maybe a distant sound outside became distorted by the bathroom acoustics. Maybe there was a noise from another room that I heard differently because I was scared. There are normal explanations. There almost always are. But the sound felt too real. That is what has stayed with me. It did not sound like a vague noise. It did not sound like water. It did not sound like a pipe groaning or a door shutting. It sounded like a person screaming with real rage behind it. The kind of scream that makes your body react before your brain has time to ask questions. For a few seconds, I was certain that something terrible had happened in the house. And then, there was nothing. No one hurt. No one angry. No one even aware that I had heard anything. It was not the scariest story in the world. Nothing appeared in front of me. No one grabbed the shower curtain. No door opened by itself. No strange figures stood in the hallway. But it still stayed with me. Maybe because I was already scared of showers. Maybe because I had spent years associating them with isolation, darkness, and being cut off from the people downstairs. Maybe because that scream seemed to confirm every childhood fear I had ever had about standing behind a shower curtain. Even now, I sometimes think about it when I shower. Not every time, but especially when I am alone in a quiet house. Especially when the water is loud enough to cover every other sound. Especially when I close my eyes to rinse shampoo out of my hair. For a second, I become that kid again. I am standing in a bathroom, unable to hear the rest of the house. I am waiting for something to happen. And I am trying not to look at the shower curtain too quickly. My mom and dad had something happen to them years ago that they still talk about, even now. It was one of those stories that sounds simple when you tell it in a few sentences, but when you slow it down and picture it the way they lived it, it becomes a lot harder to explain away. This happened while they were driving through Kentucky, somewhere between Louisville and Somerset. At the time, my older sister was still a baby, not even 1 year old yet. She was strapped into the back seat of my dad's old Bronco, too young to understand anything that was happening around her. My parents were young then, and like a lot of young families, they did not have much, but they had that Bronco, and they trusted it to get them where they needed to go. It was not a smooth, easy highway drive. They were on one of those long back roads that cut through the countryside. If you have ever driven through that part of Kentucky, you know the kind of road I mean. It is dark in a way city people do not really understand. There are stretches where the road bends and twists through trees, hills, and empty land, and for long periods you may not see another car. The woods sit close on both sides, and once the sun goes down, the darkness seems to press right up against the windows. My dad was driving, and my mom was in the passenger seat. My sister was behind them, probably half asleep in her car seat, making small baby noises every now and then. The Bronco was old, loud, and a little rough, so the ride was full of engine noise, road noise, and the soft rattling of things inside the vehicle. It was the kind of drive where you keep your eyes on the road because the curves come up fast and the trees make it hard to see too far ahead. My mom says she remembers feeling tired but calm at first. It was just a normal drive. Nothing about the night seemed strange. They had taken back roads before, and my dad was comfortable driving them. He was the kind of man who did not get scared easily. If something broke, he would get out and fix it. If he heard a noise outside, he would go check. That was just how he was. The road they were on was narrow and winding, with woods on both sides. There were no streetlights, no houses nearby, and no signs of people. Just the road, the trees, and the darkness. The headlights of the Bronco lit up the pavement in front of them, but outside that small cone of light, everything was black. At some point, my mom noticed something through the passenger window. At first, she thought it might be a reflection, maybe light bouncing off the glass, or something from the dashboard. She looked away and then looked back, expecting it to be gone. But it was still there. In the woods, maybe 50 feet away from the road, there was a glowing green ball of light. She stared at it for a moment, trying to understand what she was seeing. It was not a porch light. It was not a flashlight. It was not attached to a pole, a car, or a house. It was just there, floating above the ground among the trees. The light was green, but not like a normal green light. It had a strange glow to it, almost soft around the edges, but bright in the middle. It did not flicker like a fire or blink like an aircraft. It hovered steadily, moving through the trees at the same speed as the Bronco. My mom leaned forward a little and looked harder. She thought maybe her eyes were playing tricks on her because of the dark road and the movement of the car. But the more she watched it, the clearer it became. The glowing ball was not staying behind. It was not just sitting in the woods as they passed it. It was following them. She turned to my dad and asked him if he saw it. At first, he probably thought she meant an animal's eyes reflecting in the headlights, or maybe a light from a house hidden back in the trees. But when he glanced over, he saw it too. That is the part of the story that always makes it harder to dismiss. It was not just one person seeing something strange. Both of them saw it. My mom saw it from the passenger seat, and my dad saw it while he was driving. They were both looking at the same thing. My dad slowed the Bronco down a little, maybe just to get a better look. When he slowed down, the green light slowed down too. That made them both go quiet. My dad pressed the gas again, and the Bronco picked up speed. The road curved ahead, and the trees blurred in the darkness. The green ball moved faster too, still keeping pace with them, still hovering in the woods about the same distance away. My mom says that was the moment she really became afraid. Before that, it was strange. After that, it felt like it knew they were there. My dad slowed down again. The light slowed down with them. He sped up again. It sped up again. It did not move like a car. It did not bounce like a person running with a flashlight. It glided. It stayed smooth, steady and close, as if it was moving on its own path beside the road. Then my dad did something that made my mom's fear even worse. He stopped the Bronco. The tires crunched a little on the side of the road as he pulled over. The engine kept running, rumbling under them, and the headlights pointed ahead into the empty road. For a second, everything felt still. The green ball stopped too. It hovered there in the woods, at about the same distance it had been the whole time. It did not drift away. It did not disappear. It simply stopped when they stopped. My mom looked at my dad, and my dad looked out toward the trees. He was not the type to panic. If anything, seeing something that strange only made him more curious. My mom could tell what he was thinking before he even said it. He wanted to get out. He wanted to walk into the woods and see what it was. My mom immediately told him no. She did not say it softly. She begged him not to go. She reminded him that their baby was in the back seat. This was not just him on some back road, free to take a risk because curiosity got the better of him. They had my sister with them. She was tiny, helpless, and completely dependent on them. My dad kept looking at the light. He was drawn to it, not in a strange mind control way, at least not that my mom ever described, but in the way a brave or stubborn person gets when something does not make sense. He wanted an answer. He wanted to know if it was some kind of natural thing, a prank, a person, an animal, or something else. He did not like being scared by something he could not identify. My mom, on the other hand, had no interest in getting answers. She wanted distance. She wanted the Bronco moving again. She wanted to be away from that road, away from those woods, and away from that green light. She told him again not to get out. My dad had his hand near the door, like he was ready to open it. My mom pleaded with him. She told him to think about the baby. She told him that whatever that thing was, it had followed them, matched their speed, and stopped when they stopped. That was enough. They did not need to know more. The baby in the back seat made a small sound. And my mom says that brought the fear into sharper focus. It is one thing to be scared for yourself. It is another thing to be scared when your child is with you. Every instinct in her was telling her that they needed to leave. The green light remained there, floating in the woods. It did not come closer. That may sound comforting, but my mom says it was not. The fact that it stayed at the same distance made it worse somehow. It felt deliberate. It felt like it was watching them, waiting to see what they would do next. The trees around it were dark, but the green glow touched parts of them. My parents could see faint outlines of trunks and branches near the light, like the glow was catching them just enough to prove it was really there. It was not just something on the window. It was not inside the Bronco. It was out there, in the woods. Finally, my dad listened to my mom. He did not get out. He put the Bronco back into motion and pulled away from the side of the road. The green light started moving again. My mom says her stomach dropped when it followed. Some part of her had hoped that once they started driving again, maybe it would stay behind. Maybe it would fade into the trees, or maybe they would realize it had been attached to something after all. But it did not stay behind. It moved with them, still hovering, still glowing, still about 50 feet off the road. My dad drove faster, but not so fast that he would lose control on the winding road. The curves made it hard to speed too much. The Bronco was not a sports car, and those roads were not forgiving. Every turn had to be handled carefully, especially with a baby in the back seat. The light kept up. For a while, neither of them said much. My dad watched the road and kept glancing toward the woods. My mom kept turning her head to check if it was still there. Each time she looked, it was. Every time the Bronco slowed for a curve, it slowed too. Every time the Bronco picked up speed on a straight stretch, it picked up speed as well. The whole thing lasted around 20 minutes. 20 minutes may not sound like much when you say it quickly, but when you are scared, 20 minutes is a long time. It is long enough for your mind to run through every possible explanation and reject most of them. It is long enough to wonder if you are in danger. It is long enough to think about your child in the back seat and imagine all the terrible things that could happen on an empty road with nobody around to help. My mom tried to make sense of it. Could it have been another vehicle somewhere behind the trees? No, because it was not moving on a road. Could it have been a person with a light? No person could move that smoothly through the woods, keep up with a vehicle, and stop exactly when they stopped. Could it have been some kind of reflection? No, because both of them saw it outside, and it lit up parts of the trees. Could it have been a drone? This was years ago, long before drones were something people just had, and even now the way they describe it does not sound like that. My dad may have been trying to explain it too, but he was quieter than usual. That is one detail my mom always mentions. My dad was not easily shaken, but during that drive, even he did not have much to say. He did not laugh it off. He did not tell her she was imagining it. He saw exactly what she saw. The road kept twisting through the trees. The headlights swept across the pavement, lighting up curves, signs, and patches of grass along the roadside. The inside of the Bronco felt small, like the darkness outside had swallowed everything except that little moving box of light and noise. And still, the green ball followed. My mom kept checking on my sister in the back seat. The baby did not understand what was happening. She was safe in her car seat, wrapped in that innocent calm babies have when the adults around them are terrified. My mom says that made the situation even stranger. There they were, both adults watching something impossible outside, while their baby sat behind them, unaware of the fear filling the front seats. At one point, My dad slowed again, maybe because of a bend in the road, or maybe because he wanted to test it one more time. The light slowed too. That removed any last doubt they had about whether it was just a coincidence. It was reacting to them. That is the part that stayed with both of them. A strange light in the woods would have been weird enough. A strange light moving beside the road would have been even weirder. But a light that changed speed when they changed speed, then stopped when they stopped, felt personal. It felt like the thing was not simply there. It felt like it had chosen to move with them. My mom kept telling my dad not to stop again. She did not want him giving in to curiosity. She knew him well enough to know he might still be thinking about it. She could feel that part of him wanting to turn the Bronco around, or pull over again, or step out and prove there was nothing to be afraid of. But she also knew there was something wrong about it. She told him to keep driving. So he did. The Bronco continued down that lonely road, engine growling, tires humming, headlights cutting through the dark. The green ball stayed in the woods, always near them, always just far enough away that they could not make out any solid shape behind it. Then, after about 20 minutes, it vanished. There was no explosion of light, no sound, no movement into the sky. It did not shoot away or fade slowly. One moment it was there, glowing green between the trees, and the next moment, it was gone. My mom looked back, thinking maybe the trees had blocked it for a second. She waited for it to reappear on the other side of a trunk, or above a dip in the land. But it never came back. My dad kept driving. For a while, neither of them spoke. They just kept looking ahead, waiting for it to return. The road continued, the trees continued, and the darkness outside the windows looked normal again, but the normal feeling did not come back with it. My mom says the silence after it disappeared was almost as uncomfortable as the fear while it was there. When the light was following them, at least they knew where it was. Once it vanished, they had no idea what it had been, where it had gone, or whether it might appear again. Eventually, they got back to more familiar roads, and the tension slowly eased. But they did not forget it. They never found a clear explanation. They did not see a news report about lights in the area. They did not hear about anyone playing a prank. They did not discover a tower, a house, or anything else that could explain what had followed them through the woods that night. Over the years, they told the story the same way. The details never really changed. It was an old Bronco. My sister was a baby in the back seat. They were driving between Louisville and Somerset, Kentucky, on a long, dark, winding back road. A glowing green ball appeared in the woods about 50 feet away. It followed them. When my dad slowed down, it slowed down. When he sped up, it sped up. When he stopped, it stopped. My dad wanted to get out and look at it, but my mom begged him not to because their infant daughter was in the vehicle. After about 20 minutes, it disappeared. That is all that happened, but it is enough. It is the kind of story that does not need a monster, a scream, or a dramatic ending. The fear comes from how quiet it was, how empty the road was, how controlled the light seemed, how close my dad came to stepping out into those woods, and how, even after all these years, neither of my parents can say what they saw. My dad has always been curious about it. I think a part of him still wonders what would have happened if he had opened that door and walked toward the trees. Maybe he thinks he would have found some simple answer, something ordinary that only looked impossible in the dark. My mom does not wonder that way. She is still grateful he stayed in the Bronco. Because to her, the scariest part was never just the glowing green ball. It was the feeling that it wanted them to stop. It was the way it waited when they waited. It was the way it moved when they moved. And it was the thought of my dad stepping out, leaving her and their baby alone in that old Bronco on a dark Kentucky back road, while something glowing in the woods hovered silently and watched. I grew up in an old Edwardian house that always felt much bigger than it really was. It was the kind of house people like to call beautiful from the outside. It had tall windows, old brickwork, a heavy front door, and rooms with high ceilings that made every sound seem larger than it should have been. During the day, it felt warm enough. It was just home. It had the usual mess of a family house, the smell of cooking from the kitchen, coats hanging by the door, shoes left in the hallway, and light coming through the windows in long pale strips. But at night, the house changed. I know that sounds dramatic, and I do not mean it in the way people talk about haunted houses in films. It was not always frightening. It did not feel evil all the time. It just felt old. It felt like the house had been standing there long before us, and would still be standing there long after we were gone. At night, when the heating clicked off and the room settled into silence, the place seemed to listen. The hallway was the part of the house I remember most clearly. It was long and narrow, running through the middle of the house like a spine. The ceiling was high, and the walls were painted a pale color that looked almost gray when the daylight faded. The floorboards creaked in certain places no matter how carefully you walked. There was one board near the stairs that always gave a small, sharp sound, and another closer to the back of the house that made a deeper groan, like someone shifting their weight. Because of the shape of the hallway, sound traveled strangely. If someone was in the kitchen, you could sometimes hear a spoon being placed on a counter from the other end of the house. If someone shut a door upstairs, it seemed to echo down through the walls. And when my dad played the piano, the sound filled the whole place. My dad was a very talented pianist. He was not famous or anything like that, but to me he sounded like someone who should have been. He had played for years, and he had this way of making the piano feel like a person was speaking. Sometimes the music was bright and quick, sometimes soft and sad, and sometimes it was the kind of music that made you stop what you were doing without even realizing it. His piano was kept in a room just off the hallway. It was not the living room. It was a separate room, a little quieter than the rest of the house. I always thought of it as his room, even though we all used it sometimes. It had a dark wooden piano against one wall, a stool with worn edges, a bookcase, and a few old framed pictures. There was a window that looked out toward the side of the house, but in the evening, unless the light was on, that room became very dark very quickly. When my dad was home, it was normal to hear music coming from there. Sometimes he would come in from work, take off his coat, and go straight to the piano before even making tea. Other times he would sit there late in the evening after dinner, playing quietly while my mom watched television or read. I grew up with that sound. It was part of the house. It was part of him. That is probably why I did not feel scared at first. I was about 14 when it happened. It was an ordinary evening. Nothing strange had happened during the day. No storm, no power cut, no argument, no reason for the house to feel different. My dad was working an afternoon shift. I remember that clearly because his shifts were always something we planned around. He had gone to work earlier that day and was not supposed to finish until 10 at night. That meant he would not usually be home until a little after that. My mom and I were in the house. I do not remember exactly what she was doing at first, but I remember the living room light being on, and I remember the rest of the house feeling dim. It must have been evening, not very late, but late enough for the hallway to be mostly dark, unless someone turned the light on. I was walking down the hallway, not thinking about anything important. At 14, you move through your own house without paying much attention. You know every corner, every mark on the wall, every sound under your feet. I remember walking along the hallway and hearing the usual small noises of the house around me. The floorboards gave under my steps. Somewhere in the house, a pipe clicked. The air had that still evening feeling, when everything outside has gone quiet but the night has not fully settled yet. Then, I heard the piano. It came from my dad's room. At first, it was just a few notes, soft but clear. Then it became a little more certain, like someone was sitting properly at the keys and playing. It was not loud, it was not dramatic, it was not the kind of sound that would make you jump. That was what made it so strange later. At the time, it sounded completely normal. It sounded like my dad. I stopped in the hallway for a moment and listened. The music was gentle. I cannot remember the exact tune now, and that bothers me sometimes. I have tried to remember it over the years, but all I can hold on to is the feeling of it. It had the same careful rhythm my dad had when he was playing to himself, and not trying to impress anyone. Not a performance. Not practice exactly, just him sitting there, letting his hands move. That was why my first thought was not fear. My first thought was, Dad's home early. It made perfect sense. Maybe his shift had ended sooner than expected. Maybe he had not felt well. Maybe someone had covered the rest of his shift. Maybe I had remembered the time wrong. There were a dozen normal explanations, and at 14, I was happy to accept the easiest one. I kept walking down the hallway, and the music continued behind me. I remember feeling almost pleased. There was something comforting about the thought of him being home. The house always felt more complete when he was there, especially in the evenings. I went into the living room, where my mom was, and said something like, I didn't realize Dad had come home early. I said it casually. I did not whisper. I was not frightened. I was just making conversation. My mom looked at me. That is the part I remember with uncomfortable clarity. Not the exact position of everything in the room, not what was on the television, not what I had been doing before. I remember her face. I remember the way she looked at me like she had not understood what I meant. Then she said, "He's still at work." For a second, I did not react. The words reached me, but they did not fit with what I had just heard. I think I even smiled slightly, like she must have misunderstood me. I said something like, "No." I heard the piano. She did not smile back. She told me again that he was still at work. I felt something change in the room then. It was small, but it was immediate. A moment before, the house had been normal. The hallway, the piano, the evening, all of it had been ordinary. Then, all at once, the same ordinary things felt wrong. I turned my head toward the hallway. The music had stopped. That was the first time I felt afraid. Not terrified. Not yet. Just a cold, uncertain feeling in my chest. The kind you get when you realize you have missed something important, but you do not know what it is. The hallway outside the living room looked darker than it had before. It was the same hallway I had walked through 1,000 times, but now I did not want to step into it. My mom must have seen something on my face because she asked me what I had heard. I told her again. The piano. Dad's piano. Someone had been playing it. She did not laugh. I think that made it worse. If she had laughed and told me I was being silly, maybe I could have accepted that. Maybe I could have told myself I had imagined it, or that the sound had come from outside, or that it was the television, or a neighbor. But she just looked toward the hallway, too. The house was silent. There was no music now, no footsteps, no movement from the piano room. Just the low hum of the evening and the faint sounds that old houses make when they settle. I knew I had to check. I did not want to, but I knew that if I did not, the fear would only grow in my mind. The piano room was only a short distance away. There was nothing dramatic about it. I only had to walk down the hallway and open the door. If Dad was somehow home, I would feel stupid and relieved. If the window was open and something had knocked against the piano, we would close it and laugh about it later. But I already knew that was not right. Because I had not heard one note, I had heard playing. I stepped back into the hallway. The air felt colder there. It may not really have been, but that is how I remember it. The living room light reached only partway across the floor, and beyond that the hallway fell into shadow. The door to the piano room was closed, or almost closed. I cannot remember if it was fully shut, but I remember seeing the dark line around it. I walked slowly. Every step seemed too loud. The floorboards creaked beneath me, and each sound made me want to stop. I kept listening for the piano to start again. In a strange way, I almost wanted it to. If it started while I was standing there, at least I would know I had not imagined it. But the silence stayed. When I reached the door, I paused. My hand was close to the handle, but I did not touch it right away. I remember staring at the wood of the door. I remember the shape of the handle. I remember being aware of my own breathing. I was old enough to know that houses make sounds. Old enough to understand that people hear things wrong sometimes. But I was also old enough to know the difference between a random noise and my father's piano being played. I put my hand on the handle. It felt cold. I opened the door. The room was completely dark, not dim, not shadowy, completely dark. The curtains had not been opened, or maybe the last of the daylight had already gone from that side of the house. The piano was only a shape against the wall. I could just make out the outline of it, the hard edge of the top, the stool sitting in front of it. There was no one there. No one sitting at the piano. No one standing by the window. No one hiding behind the door. The room had that heavy stillness that empty rooms have when they have been closed for a while. It did not feel like someone had just been inside. There was no movement, no sound of clothes shifting, no breath, no footsteps escaping into another part of the house. I reached for the light switch and turned it on. The room appeared all at once, ordinary and wrong at the same time. The piano was exactly where it always was. The stool was tucked in close, or near enough. The books were on the shelf. The pictures were on the wall. Nothing had fallen. Nothing looked disturbed. But I knew what I had heard. I stood there in the doorway for a while, staring at the piano. I expected to see something that would explain it. A radio. A toy. Something on the floor. Maybe one of the keys stuck down. But there was nothing. The piano looked perfectly normal. My mom came up behind me, but she did not step fully into the room at first. I could feel her there in the hallway. Neither of us said anything for a moment. I think we were both waiting for the other one to explain it. Eventually, she asked me if I was sure. I said yes. And I was. That is the thing I always come back to. I was not half asleep. I was not dreaming. I was not a little child with an overactive imagination. I was 14, awake, walking through my own house, and I heard my dad's piano being played from the room where his piano was kept. My dad came home later that night, around the time he was supposed to. I remember watching him come in and feeling strange relief, as if seeing him in the doorway proved something. He had not been home earlier. He had not come in quietly. He had not played the piano. He had been at work the whole time. I do not remember exactly what he said when we told him. I do not think he made a big thing of it. Adults often try not to make strange things feel too strange, especially when there is a child watching their reaction. He may have suggested that it was a sound from outside, or that I had mistaken something else for music. But I could tell he listened. He knew that piano. He knew the sound of the house, and I think he knew from my face that I was not trying to scare anyone or make up a story. Nothing else happened that night. That almost made it worse. There was no second burst of music, no footsteps in the hallway, no door opening by itself, no dramatic proof that something impossible had happened. Just that one small moment. A few notes, a short piece of music, and then darkness. Over the years, I have tried to explain it in normal ways. Maybe the sound came from a neighbor's house. But the houses were not close enough for piano music to sound like it was coming from inside our hallway. Maybe someone had a television or radio on. But I knew the difference between music coming from a speaker and music coming from that room. Maybe I imagined it. But I had no reason to. I was not scared until after my mom told me my dad was still at work. The worst part is how familiar it sounded. If it had been random banging on the keys, I could have told myself it was the house settling or something falling inside the piano. If it had been one note, I could have blamed a loose part or a change in temperature. But it was not like that. It was someone playing, carefully, softly, like they knew the instrument, like they had played it before. I do not live in that house anymore. I have lived in other places since then, normal places with lower ceilings and shorter hallways and rooms that do not hold sound in the same way. But sometimes, even now, I think about that evening. I think about walking down the hallway and hearing music where there should not have been any. I think about saying, I didn't realize Dad had come home early. I think about my mom's face when she told me he was still at work. And more than anything, I think about opening that door and seeing the piano room in complete darkness. No person. No movement. No explanation. Just the piano sitting there, silent, as if it had never made a sound at all.